Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Apostate Alauddin, and you're watching one of the best ex-Muslim YouTube channels. Today, we will be continuing the series of Dissecting Apologetics, where we watch a lecture or video by a da'wah man or a sheikh or a person from a Muslim background with an Islamic education to explain or a concept or answer a question. And we watch it bit by bit, we take it apart, we share our thoughts, and hopefully through that experience, you learn something from watching. And today's video is by Yasir Qadhi, a person who I've covered multiple times on this channel. And the question in focus here is everyone born a Muslim? Because if you're not aware, there is this concept in Islam that everyone is born on the fitrah, born on this default state of being a Muslim. And then they're taught something or another by their environment and their family and so on, and then they become some other religion or no religion. Obviously, I don't think that is true, but we want to hear from Yasir Qadhi what he thinks and how he explains that. I'm also joined by a friend of the channel and another YouTuber. You should check out his channel afterwards, Theo Critic. Welcome, Theo.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, and sorry for being away for so long. We're back again. And let's just get right into it in watching today's video. Yasir Qadhi, let's hear him speak.
So I always like to summarize where we are and remind ourselves of the journey that we're doing. So for the last few weeks, months, we have been discussing the importance of religion, why we need religion. And for the last 2-3 weeks, we're now moving on after Ramadan to the more specific topic of which religion, or in other words, how do we know Islam is true? And we're going to be spending quite a lot of time on this particular topic. And then inshallah, once we've done that, whenever we finish, we will then move on to a whole bunch of miscellaneous topics that deal with modernity, some of the problems that many people might have with. So we've proven Islam to be true, inshallah, in a few months we'll finish that. Once we've proven Islam to be true, overall, there are still areas that don't seem to make sense, or there are unanswered questions.
So quick note, it's kind of hard to tell on the timeline when this lecture is, because if you go to his videos, kind of all over the place, it's not neatly organized in a series of lectures. So he references in the past lecture, we spoke about this and that. It's hard to follow, but we did cover a live stream before, sorry, a video before in a live stream where he discussed how to prove Islam, or that Islam can be proven. Obviously, I think I've demonstrated that it has not been proven, at least not the way that he's proving it. But he's saying, take it for granted that in a few lectures, I will be proving that Islam is true. But yeah, let's continue listening to his intro.
So liberalism, freedom of choice, modernism, secularism, democracy, feminism, all of these types of isms that are out there, we're going to inshallah go over them. Darwinism, theory of evolution, we're going to go over them one by one and see how we can better explain or understand, inshallah ta'ala. So today we're then continuing from where we left off, which is how do we know Islam is true? And I'm going to start today a topic that we will spend probably at least 3 to 4 weeks on, and that is the topic that, well, before I jump there, let me take a step back, inshallah, because this topic is going to be a deep one, and we're going to take it bit by bit. Before I give us the topic, I wanted to set up the problem. The problem is as follows. Most of us are Muslims, factually speaking, because we're born into a Muslim family. That's just a fact.
I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm happy that he's acknowledging this fact, because I've spoken to a lot of Muslims who say, well, if I wasn't born a Muslim, I would find my way to Islam and I would be a Muslim. But he is acknowledging that most Muslims are Muslim because they were born Muslim. He doesn't continue to say that, they're born Muslim and it's very hard to leave Islam and it's very discouraged and it's not even a question for most people. It's not even a possibility. That's why most Muslims are Muslims. But he does start with acknowledging that most of them are Muslim because they're born Muslim.
There's an undeniable reality that people, by and large, follow the faith of their families. Now, we are not the first to mention this. In fact, of the first people to make this a core point of their philosophy is somebody who is considered to be the father of modern Western philosophy, René Descartes. And Descartes died 1650. Descartes is considered by and large to be the primary intellectual founder of the modern school of Western philosophy. And Descartes, obviously you all remember, you should know from your high school, from your college classes, Descartes has his famous quote, "I think therefore I am, cogito ergo sum," I think therefore I am. And that, people make fun of it, make jokes out of it, but in fact that summarizes his philosophy. What is his philosophy? What made Descartes special? And believe me, this is relevant.
Okay, Theo wants me to pause. What do you want to say, Theo?
Yeah, so it's funny, he introduces Descartes and he'll spend a lot of time explaining, so there's a little bit of pseudo-intellectualism that is going to sneak in over here. He's going to spend a lot of time talking about it as though it's a philosophical thing by talking about a philosopher. He's also going to undermine him in just a minute. You can go on. It'll be funny.
But yeah, I guess it's worth reminding the viewers that just because somebody name drops something or someone or a concept doesn't mean that they're actually engaging with that idea, or that the rest of their ideas are therefore on the same degree of validity or notoriety or something of that sort. So yeah, what does he say about Descartes' "I think therefore I am"?
Because what we're going to come to is directly linked to what Descartes is basically problematizing. Descartes is problematizing inherited knowledge. How do you know anything? How do you know anything? Because everything that you think you know can be challenged. So Descartes begins with the premise of radical skepticism. He says, for example, even things I look at, my vision can be incorrect. And he gives the classic example of a pencil being put into the water and you see the pencil bent. You clearly see it. It's not straight, but you know it is straight. And he's like, I'm doubting my senses even. How do I even know anything? In fact, how do I even know I exist? Maybe, again, in the modern vernacular, maybe your philosophy teacher said this. My philosophy teacher 30 years ago, when I took my first class in philosophy, did have this thought experiment. She basically said, what if you actually don't exist and your brain is simply in a vat and it's just electrodes being put in and the world as you know it is being programmed into your brain? For those of you who are not familiar with that idea, I can give you another one that you should all be familiar with, and that is the...
Wait, let's pause here. Theo, what do you think of that thought experiment? What if we are brains in a vat?
We kind of are. My philosophy is that is my response to that philosophical position is that it doesn't really make any difference, because we exist in this universe, right? We've defined this universe to be, so many billion light years across and made up of atoms and planets. But if we existed in a vat, that would be our universe. So the question is simply that, is existence real? Not the nature of existence doesn't change existence.
And I understand the premise that, how do we know anything? How do we know that we're not dreaming right now, or that we're not, in a simulation or a brain in a vat? I guess the summary is we can't definitively say, but we have to start somewhere. So I think, therefore I am. So I'm going to assume that I am real, because what other choice do I have?
Well, the principle of I think, therefore I am is, there is a name for it. It might be anthropic principle or something related to that. But the idea is that the fact that you exist enough to ask the question, am I real, is proof that at the very least you exist. So I think, therefore I am actually answers the question, do I actually exist? In a way that a lot of people who just throw it around don't recognize it or don't realize it.
Well, I'm curious to see how he integrates that into his I guess lecture. Let's hear it.
Matrix trilogy. Or am I that old that you don't even know the Matrix trilogy?
Reference the Matrix. Let's go back.
Or am I that old that you... That idea, I can give you another one that you should all be familiar with, and that is the Matrix trilogy. Or am I that old that you don't even know the Matrix trilogy? Okay, your silence was deafening. Like, okay, you all know the red pill and the blue pill, right? Okay, it was released in my generation, but I think it's a movie that transcends that. The whole
To clarify for the younger folks out there, we don't mean the red pill as in like the phenomenon of incels and men's rights, so-called men's rights activists and so on. It's just the movie The Matrix, where there was a red pill and a blue pill, where one means you opt in to continue living in the simulation, with blinders on, and the other means you actually see the reality of the world, of that simulation.
Matrix philosophy is really, it's actually a very profound film in its own way. And of course, Islamically can easily be critiqued, but that's besides the point. Maybe we'll come to that as well. But my point is that
was
notion
just
of
throwaway.
radical.
That's funny that he's like, well, of course, Islamically we can critique it. I feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
he has to say that because it would be like he doesn't want the Muslims to see him idolizing a Western movie that, of course, has haram stuff in it, because a lot of things are haram. But yeah, anyway, that's besides the point.
Spoiler,
Skepticism. How do you
that's going to be a recurring theme in this.
It's
The-
interesting how
the-
he
dis-
touches on the haram, but he's like, but I'm not saying it's good. I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
being dismissive of Western stuff, like pulling it in
Mhm.
to ingratiate himself to the audience, but then being dismissive of it because he doesn't want to, I guess, put it on a pedestal or whatever. Like that's the running theme of this video.
Yeah. Well, let's hear it.
know anything is true? How do you know anything is true? Descartes was the first to propose it. Now, super interesting, and just because we're a Muslim class, I need to say this. Descartes, in all likelihood, seems to have taken this notion from none other than Al-Ghazali. And I don't say this lightly. I'm not the type of guy to say, oh, the Muslims came up with everything. You know that's not me, right? Sliced cheese, we invented it. No, I don't go that way, okay? It's like we did not invent sliced cheese. But we did invent a lot of things. And in all likelihood, Descartes seems to have gotten this type of notion and the whiff of this type of thought from Al-Ghazali's Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. Al-Ghazali has a famous book, Deliverance from Error. If you read Al-Ghazali's Deliverance from Error, you actually really find a very similar overlap to Descartes' writings on this topic of radical skepticism. And I'll give you one example where Al-Ghazali writes in his Al-Munqidh. This is Al-Ghazali, not Descartes. Al-Ghazali writes that I observed around me, and I noticed that the children of Christians always grow up to become Christians, and the children of Jews grow up to be Jews, and the children of Muslims grow up to be Muslims. So it is the influence of education and upbringing that determines their religion. Therefore, I realized that the truth of a belief cannot rest on mere blind following of your ancestors. This is Al-Ghazali, who is observing the world and saying, you know what, if I look around, Muslims predominantly are Muslim because their parents are Muslim, and vice versa, and Haluma Jarra, or all the other examples as well. Descartes says, and I quote,
I'm curious to see, he said Descartes may have copied it from Al-Ghazali. I'm not gonna, argue whether or not he copied it or both were inspired to say something similar, but let's hear if there's a similarity.
That one must begin life by making a clean sweep of all opinions that one has received, and to begin again from the base foundation in order to establish a firm and lasting knowledge. Even amongst those who have never lost their faith, it is evident that not all have built their faith from rational foundations, but in fact, most people accept faith because it was the faith they were brought up in. This is Descartes. Descartes is around a few decades after Al-Ghazali, okay? Descartes is like 5 decades after Al-Ghazali, and one of my professors at Yale, Frank Griffel, he has a paper in which he actually traces how Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal was brought in an Arabic manuscript form to Italy, and one of the people who had it in his possession was a teacher of Descartes, and that's the only connection we have because Al-Munqidh had not yet been translated, but one of the people who had a physical copy was one of the professors of Descartes. So,
just a side note, the default position for some Islamic apologetics people would be like, no, Descartes didn't steal it from Al-Ghazali, or didn't borrow the idea, or wasn't inspired by Al-Ghazali. I don't quite care whether he did or didn't. I just find it interesting that Yasir Qadhi is capable of seeing the train of thought, or I guess seeing the logic in how someone could be inspired by an idea that existed before them or something that was said before them. But yet when it comes to the prophet, the main prophet, Muhammad, there's no way in hell or heaven that he could have actually copied or plagiarized or accidentally been inspired by any of the things said by Jews, Zoroastrians, Christians, or anybody else in that region and beyond. He must have gotten everything from divine knowledge. It's interesting. Like maybe his professor did actually trace this manuscript and whatnot, but even if you don't trace it, you can see how it's feasible that something like that could happen. But outside of this discussion, he doesn't really think that way when it comes to Muhammad.
It's very likely that the notions of Al-Ghazali are being taught to people like Descartes, and Descartes is then basically going with it. Now, why am I bringing up Descartes and this quote of Al-Ghazali? Because we now get to one of the fundamental problems that we have to solve when we come to the notion of how do we know Islam to be true. And that problem is we are all beginning our journey with inherent biases, and that is we're already Muslim. We are not attempting to solve this problem from a clean slate. Every one of us in this room is a believing Muslim, and we are approaching this problem as believers. So are we not kind of sort of presupposing the answer even before we begin to find?
I love this. This seems like a moment of lucidity, a moment of honesty. I don't know if it's going to follow up that way and continue that way, but I just want to acknowledge this is important. Starting with acknowledging that, of course, we believe in it because we were born into it. We have to start from a blank slate and assume that it's not true, that if we weren't born into it, what would we think? I hope he continues to follow on that. And by the way, I am not your sister. Thank you so much for gifting 5 people memberships. That's very kind of you. And thank you to all the super chats so far. I'll try to read some in a minute or in a little bit once we keep watching.
The solution. We already have the answer, and we're pretending that we're going to try to find the solution. And people like Descartes, people like Ghazali, they are pointing out this contradiction, that it's not just Muslims who have this problem. Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Jews, every single person of faith is inherently believing in their faith and then attempting to believe that or trying to prove that their faith is correct. So both Descartes and Ghazali then adopt what is called radical skepticism. And that skepticism is the assumption that you begin with a clean slate.
Theo, you have thoughts? You told me to pause here.
Yeah. No, just keep playing this. This is important, though. This is super important.
Focus on this radical skepticism.
Assumption that you negate everything and you begin your inquiry as if you are neutral. And then you build from neutrality. You build from from a clean piece of paper. Now you start writing your presumptions and then see where this leads. Now, theoretically, that sounds great.
Hold on.
And with utmost respect to it.
Yeah. So this is super important. So what he's saying is that you may be born with certain things. When you may have certain things imparted in you, but you have to start with a clean slate. You have to throw all of that away and start with an. This is not Yasir Qadhi's thought. This is not his position. He is quoting Al-Ghazali.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. He's quoting Al-Ghazali and Descartes, right?
Yeah.
Over here. Okay. So this, from a philosophical point of view, I just want to point out that Yasir Qadhi has a degree in philosophy from Yale University. It's one of the most prestigious universities. He has a master's degree in philosophy, right? And this is a really important philosophical concept to he's calling it radical skepticism, but it's just skepticism. Like it's just basic. Don't assume what you're told is real. Question what your assumptions are.
I guess what would make it radical is if you start with, do I exist? Like
yes,
that would be a radical form of it. But he's calling dismissing the religion that you're born in and starting from scratch radical, which is not.
I guess in the mind of a person who was born, raised Sunni Muslim their entire life, the existence of God may be at the same level of truth to them as, do I exist, right? I don't know. I'm putting myself in your head here. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, not now, but at some point, I
Yeah.
probably thought that way. Yeah, it would have been a very radical idea to me.
Okay.
But I'm saying this also based on the last video that I watched of him and dissected. He would paint. He said unreasonable skepticism is what he called it in that video. Now he's calling something similar radical skepticism. But in the past, when he's talking about Islam, he's just saying if you question too much, like if you question this or that, that's unreasonable skepticism, and that if you know, if you can, if an atheist or a non-believer were to see the sky split up and they wouldn't believe in God, that's unreasonable skepticism. So I'm wondering if he's using those terms interchangeably.
Well, he is, but also he isn't. But this is a thing. So you invited me to join you for your last live stream, and I couldn't because I got sick and I lost my voice. It's still not completely back yet. But what I wanted to say in the last, like if I was there, I would have pointed this out. He is copying in the last live stream, he was copying the talking points of Protestant evangelical Christian apologists. It's like he watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos from Frank Turek, and he was quoting almost word for word exactly what those guys were saying. So like in the last video, he was using that vernacular. In this one, he's using a slightly different vernacular, which is more, I guess, more philosophical, more academic vernacular.
Right. Well, let's hear what he has to say about radical skepticism, or I guess what Descartes has to say. I'm not sure.
I do respect him a lot. I politely disagree with this enterprise, with this methodology, for many reasons.
Okay, so he doesn't agree with that.
Not at all. That was it. That was all.
I take recommendation. I gave him a lot of credit earlier for saying, "Hey, at least he acknowledges that we have to start from a neutral ground." But no,
he doesn't.
He doesn't. But let's hear why. Maybe he has a point. Maybe I'm missing something. Why does he disagree?
Of them is, for many reasons, of them is, well, why don't I ask you, what is problematic with the notion of beginning by skepticism, beginning with a blank slate? What would be problematic? As a Muslim, what is problematic? Tell me.
Okay, as a Muslim, it's sort of circular, even the way that he poses this.
Hold on, I want to say something here. That's really important. What he's doing right now is not what it looks like. What it looks like is that he is engaging the audience, right? He's in a class, and it looks like that he is trying to entice,
like he's asking a question for people to participate, but obviously he's not. Yeah,
that's not what he's doing. What he's doing is a specific technique that is taught in school. So my background is business, right? And part of that, business and marketing, and in personal selling, I don't remember what it's called. It's been like 20 years since I went to school. It was, but I think it's called trial close. It's get the customer to say what they would do with the car if they owned it, to get them into that headspace. He is trying, rather than presenting this is why it wouldn't work, rather than getting everybody into a philosophical mindset and then presenting this is why I don't, he's trying to get his audience to say it so that they're more sold on it internally, psychologically. This is a manipulation technique, and he knows it.
Yeah, he's not saying, do you think this is unreasonable? He says, it is unreasonable. As Muslims, tell me why. Or like,
yes.
Yeah, and I don't think he's even going to really, maybe I'm wrong, I don't think he will take feedback from the audience. But this seems to be a common theme, aside from what you mentioned, fancy MBAs aside, a lot of sheikhs have this down very well, and not maliciously, just it's ingrained in them, where they would ask you a question just to get you to fill in a word or even to nod along, and then they continue. So that way you're faux engaged. You're not actually engaged, but they make you feel as if you did agree and they did ask you a question and you said yes. So yeah, I agree. It is a bit of a manipulation technique. But let's hear what he wants to say about that. So he said, as Muslims, right, this is unreasonable. But I thought we're discussing why that position of radical skepticism is unreasonable in and of itself, not just for Muslims. But he says, as Muslims, it's unreasonable. It's kind of circular.
with the notion of beginning by skepticism, beginning with a blank slate? What would be problematic? As a Muslim, what is problematic? Tell me. Yes.
Oh, he does listen to them.
There
My
is no
bad.
clean slate. Okay, we're getting there. You're getting there. Yes. It opens the door to kufr. How so?
As in, like, it makes you question whether there is, I mean, how would it level, like, it makes you question whether there is, like, a God or only, like, one God or multiple.
Yeah, so to begin your journey by a blank slate basically means you will have to doubt the existence of God. You will have to doubt the truth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You will have to doubt everything. And then, is that what Islam wants us to do? I mean, quote.
Okay. I have to pause here. He says what? I disagree with this position of radical skepticism, and I think I disagree as a scholar, as a learned person who studied philosophy. That's what I'm thinking he's saying. But no, he's saying I disagree as a believer because it threatens my beliefs.
Yep.
I am so disappointed. I understand now why you said Theo. Theo had watched this video. I haven't yet. And by the way, thank you, Theo, for preparing, the interesting timestamps and for going through this. I hadn't watched it before, and he told me before, I'm so disappointed in Yasir Qadhi. I guess I'm kind of used to it at this point. But yeah, so he says, I disagree fundamentally with radical skepticism because I'm a believer and it threatens my beliefs, because I would have to doubt the prophecy of Muhammad and that Allah is real and so on. That's not a good reason, right? That's like if I said, I disagree with increasing taxes because I would be paying more taxes. What? Like, that's not, I mean, I guess that's
Yeah,
more
it's oddly
valid than what he said.
self-serving, right?
It is
It's-
self-serving, yeah.
While I'm at it, so the spoiler, it's not going to get better. The entire rest of the video is circular.
Don't tell them that. Well, it's
Oh,
going to
okay.
get better because we're going to comment on it. But if you were watching the video by itself, it wouldn't get better.
Oh yeah,
but
no, that's what I meant. His
Please
video
keep
is not going to
watching.
get better.
This live stream is going to get better. The video isn't. Anyway, let's keep listening.
Me one passage in the Quran where Allah says, doubt me. Quote me one passage where Allah says, let's begin this journey with a clean slate by rejecting the Prophet and then proving him. That's very problematic if you go that route. What's another problem? Let's keep on going. Another problem. Yes? It negates the idea of tawakkul and having connection with Allah. Very good. We're going to come back to this point. Any other problems? Yes?
It negates the idea of connecting
Removing the
with
source
Allah.
of information and prioritizing what then? What are we prioritizing when we remove other information? What would be our source of information? Eyes, ears, and reason, intellect.
Okay, so that's why he quoted Descartes earlier, is to say we can't trust our senses, even though I don't think that's what Descartes
Oh, I see.
concluded, is that we can't trust our senses.
I don't-
But he's kind of bringing up the conversation to say our senses are unreliable, and if you practice radical skepticism, you're relying on your senses instead of the word of God. But
Yeah,
that
well-
premise is so flawed.
By senses you mean intellect, right? Like your-
Intellect and ears and eyes and whatnot.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, like because he did mention those senses as well, but also your intellect, as he says. And I've long made this a point to highlight that when someone says, "Do you think you're smarter than God?" or "Do you think you have the ability to understand God's cognitive abilities?" You're not, like, that's not the correct question to ask, because the person who's practicing skepticism or thinking, in other words, if you're critically thinking, you're not claiming you know more than God. You are challenging this claim of God, not God itself, if it exists. So he's saying, do you trust your intellect more than you trust God? Well, first prove that God does exist, not just a God, but that God does exist. So he makes it seem like a very unfair. It's like a straw man of if you do critical thinking, you say you're smarter than God. I think that's sort of the summary here.
And this raises a very big problem, which we're going to come to later on. But Descartes, remember, this is now 15th century, right? This is 600 years ago. This is the beginning of the Enlightenment. And guys, I'm giving you a crash course in Western philosophy as well, because that's what we need to do.
No,
The
he isn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
he just really isn't.
Name dropping one philosopher and one concept does not mean that you're giving a crash course on Western philosophy or whatever. But maybe he's being tongue in cheek here. But you know,
No,
yeah, it bears keeping in mind that he is not actually giving a crash course on anything.
Enlightenment project was begun by Descartes. Descartes is the beginning, the founder of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment assumed that the mind is capable of achieving ultimate truth. That's the basic premise of Enlightenment philosophy.
pause here for a
Theo,
second.
I'm not as well read on philosophy or enough to say if I agree or disagree with this, if this is factual. But is what he's saying true?
I don't know specifically about whether Descartes was the starting point of the Enlightenment. What's really important to understand over here is that every religious apologist has an incentive to undermine Enlightenment. Because the thing to understand is that Europe was 500 years ago was a lot like the Muslim world, Islamic world is today, which was like every country was run by some sort of theocracy, right? Like the kings were divinely appointed, and things like that. And the Enlightenment is what so the Enlightenment philosophy is what triggered the change in, excuse me, it's what triggered the change in the thinking process of Europe and brought Europe into what's it called, secularism. Right. So it behooves him, if he's going to quote an Enlightenment philosopher, to also undermine Enlightenment in this. Otherwise, he undermines his whole argument, his whole position.
Yeah. And I have no statement on whether or not what he's saying is true, that Descartes is, the beginning of the Enlightenment stage, or his claims on Enlightenment. But I think it suits his purpose to set up this, to prop up this straw man, just so he can punch it down and say, well, I just destroyed Enlightenment and Descartes. What else do you have, But yeah, he says skepticism is bad because it would make me question my beliefs.
So I want to add one more thing.
Mhm.
This is very infuriating to me. Okay, in a really huge way. That I know you can tell. Like you've heard me say this a lot of times, but I don't know if you can tell in my voice. This is so infuriating because this guy has a master's degree from one of the most prestigious schools in the world. That's not the problem. Here's the problem. Circular reasoning, straw manning, like all the things that he's doing is what you learn in the first philosophy class in first semester. It's called critical thinking. It's philosophy 101. I'm not a philosophy major. I don't have a degree in philosophy. I don't even have a minor in philosophy. I took it, I'm the same age as him, so I took it basically the same time as he did, like, 30 years ago, whatever. And it is like so obvious to me that the stuff that he's doing from a philosophy academics point of view is like a doctor not knowing what a blood vessel is. Like it's really lame.
It's the equivalent of like anti-vax doctors, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
That's yeah. Um, I am not, as well versed in philosophy as many people out there. I've taken, one or two courses, and even I can tell, that this is not right. And you don't need to be a philosopher to not let the weight of his degrees and his education fool you. Listen to his actual words. So even without a philosophy background, you can tell that this is not adding up.
And it didn't begin there. You can say Plato also had this notion, and the Aristotelian trend by and large is similar. That if I just think rationally, I'll solve all the problems. Well, by and large, a lot of people don't believe them. Hardly any actual philosopher believes this now, because we've now moved on to post-enlightenment, post-rationalism, post-modernism, in which we realize, and this is another key point, somebody should have said this, there is no such thing as neutrality. There is no such thing as unbiasedness.
Okay, so there's a far cry, there's a big difference between I refuse to step outside my beliefs to start assessing my beliefs, and there's no thing as neutrality, so what's the point in doing any of this? I don't follow what he's saying here. He's saying even, philosophers now agree there is no such thing as neutral. You're always biased. Therefore, I'm going to be blatantly biased right in your face, and there's nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, like there's a fine line between I acknowledge that there's no such thing as bias, so we have to work extra hard and be extra aware of our biases that are being smuggled in subconsciously, perhaps. That's one thing. And what he's saying is it is impossible to come from therefore it's impossible to come from a neutral position. Neutrality and unbiasedness are not the same thing. You can hold a neutral position, you can withhold judgment about, like, if I was on a jury and there was somebody who was accused of murder, I can withhold my judgment. I can hold myself to a standard of neutrality until I hear all the evidence, and then go with the evidence whilst still acknowledging that I have biases.
Yeah. It's like how he says that, what was it, that you can't, I guess, you can't use rationality to figure out everything. You can't arrive at every truth using rationality. Therefore, follow my flawed methodology instead.
Right.
Neither me nor Theo are claiming that rationality alone is, or that, everything in the world you will find out just using rationality, or that everything is knowable. Nobody's claiming it. Maybe someone else is claiming that, but that's a straw man that he propped up just so he could say, therefore, use my flawed method instead, which is far from any sort of skepticism whatsoever.
Right.
There is no such thing. We are all biased. It's impossible to not have certain presumptions and biases. The whole notion of being unbiased is unreasonable. It's not possible. You just can't have, you can try to be less biased, you can try to have less presuppositions, but in the end of the day, you're human, you're not God. And that's what postmodernism understood.
You're human, you're not God. That itself is another one of these loaded, like he's just throwing it in there. Instead of saying we all have biases, so it makes it very difficult to figure out where to start or how to, exclude as much of our biases as possible. Instead, he says, therefore, just trust God. What are you talking about? How did you insert God into this already? He's starting, what's the word for that? When he's starting from the conclusion?
It's circular reasoning, or begging the question.
Exactly. He's begging the question.
Post-traditionalism understood, post-enlightenment understands that you cannot absolutely distance yourself from the sources of knowledge, seeing, hearing, and knowing, because that's your only source of information, right? So there are multiple problems with this. Another problem comes, the presupposition that I need to examine every single faith to prove which one is right.
Wait, before we get into that, so he says, using your senses, your eyes, your ears, that's, it's impossible not to use them, and they are biased, and they're not reliable. I'm with you. It's not an objective measure of anything. But what's the alternative? Believing that other people saw and heard things a long time ago. So you're using the same thing except with extra steps and more bullshit. Like, how is that better? I'm really, it's flabbergasting. He says you can't trust your ears and eyes, but I could trust the ears and eyes of men who existed 1,500 years ago and who participated in human trafficking. Does that make it a more trustworthy method?
How long would that take?
Okay.
How long would it take?
Hear this one, because this one's interesting.
I need to examine every single faith to prove which one is right. How long would that take? How long would it take for an average person to study all the faiths of the world and come to a conclusion?
That is an excellent point, but not in the way that he thinks he's making it. So,
I mean, this is a fallacy called argument from consequence.
The consequence being that you won't have time to look into every single faith. Therefore
you shouldn't.
Closest to you.
Yeah.
But like, let's work again. We have to try to have some extent of neutrality here. Say for example, Christianity is the truth, just for the sake of the argument here. And as a Muslim, you don't go through the effort of looking into Christianity because I don't have the time to look into every religion. Does that mean that Christianity is false just because you're too busy? What? If anything,
Yes,
this is a
that's
point
what it means.
against God. This is a point against God because if God expects you to sift through every religion, especially if you're not born into a Muslim family, and if Islam is way far down the list, or Islam is unappealing, or Islam doesn't make sense, and you skip to the next one, then you go to hell forever. Like, isn't that a point against God and this flawed method that He expects us to use? What is
That's a
the
good point.
alternative now?
That's a good point. I never thought of that. But like he's basically making an argument against God's logic here. That well, okay, so here's the circumstances: you have finite life, finite capabilities. Like I'm creating you with finite capabilities and all sorts of constraints, like you have to work and whatnot. And then in that you have to figure out what the ultimate truth is. Oh, spoiler, you don't have time for that. and
Let's
then
keep
you
this.
still get punished for letting on the wrong answer.
Yeah. But he says it's practically it's too hard to look at every single faith. Therefore, just follow the one that your parents were born in.
No, I don't think he's saying follow the ones. He'll come to that later. But like the thing is, it's so self-serving because he's saying that therefore Islam is correct. Like, how do you get to that?
Yeah. Therefore, we can dismiss Islam as one of the many religions that we don't have time to look into. Like, if that's the logic here.
You would spend years, if not decades. And in reality, how many people have not just the time, but the intellectual acumen to study all the faith traditions?
That is an excellent point. Again, not in
Yes.
the way that he's using it, because I've always struggled with this belief in Islam that Islam is so self-evident that if you have a sound mind, in the sense that there's a distinction and there's a threshold, you're either crazy or you're sane, which in reality that's not how the world works, right? There's a whole spectrum, and you're not either crazy or sane. Obviously, people on the very far end of the mentally unwell spectrum, it's easy to label as crazy. Not that I agree with that label, but the way that Islam, makes it seem, you're either of sound mind or if you're not of sound mind. If you are of sound mind and you inspect Islam honestly, as they say, without hatred and all that, an open heart and all that kind of stuff, it logically follows. It is impossible to conclude anything but that Islam is true. But then he just says it's wrong to assume that everyone has the intellect and the acumen. Is that what he says?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
to go through these religions and assess whether they make sense or not. So how do you expect people to do it for the one true religion? If why did God make it that way? Some people are too stupid. Like, let's just say that, plainly, some people don't have the ability to think that critically, or maybe, have a not a very intelligent mind, at least in this department of reading philosophy and religion and that kind of stuff. Is that their fault that they're going to hell because they weren't smart enough to find your book compelling? And the opposite is true. If they're smart enough to find another book compelling, like, this argument doesn't make any sense.
Like you and I spend a lot of time thinking about this and unpacking this and whatnot. That's a huge investment of our time.
Yeah.
Right? Not everybody has that time. Not everybody can do that. It's a skill. It's a time investment, and the on one hand he acknowledges that, and on the other hand he says, yeah, therefore I don't know, like I don't even know how to finish that sentence. Therefore don't bother, therefore take my word for it. Like what's the
Let's hear it. Yeah, so not everyone is smart enough to assess all the religions out there. Therefore, trust me, bro.
It doesn't make any sense to do this, neither rationally, nor logistically, nor even from the Quranic texts. So in reality, the notion of beginning with a blank slate and then trying to prove Islam completely neutrally doesn't add up from any sense. But then the problem comes, well, then what is the alternative?
Yeah, so he's saying it, like it's too difficult to examine all the religions, therefore it doesn't make sense to do it.
Yeah, but he's about to get to the alternative.
I don't. Okay.
What is the alternative?
Because factually speaking, look around you, the vast majority of people who follow any faith tradition happen to have been born into it, and we are no exception in this room. There's probably 1 or 2 or 3 converts in this room. The rest of us were born Muslim.
He's so close to the self-awareness. He's so close.
So how do we solve this paradox? Do you understand the paradox, right? Do you all understand the paradox that we seem to be at an impasse in that if a Hindu says, my faith, this tradition is correct, because obviously it's totally rational, logical to me, and a Christian says the same thing, and a Muslim says the same thing, and each one is saying, oh, but I examined everything and it seems all correct to me. And how would you then go about disproving the claims of other faith traditions and proving your own? In fact, it doesn't seem fair. In fact, to be brutally honest, how would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala require the average human being to sift through this entire mess of a spectrum of opinions and theologies before arriving at the right one?
Exactly. Exactly. I want to know how he answers that, how he resolves that.
And here is where we begin our solution to this intellectual paradox. And the beauty is that this solution is Quranic and Hadithic. It is directly in the Quran and Sunnah.
Bro.
And it predates the paradox formulation.
What do
It
you mean
predates it.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
No, because we both had the same thought. Go ahead.
Well, it predates it. Therefore, it's correct. I don't get it. I don't get that.
Also, it doesn't, like, how many religions have existed before Islam? How did this predate the paradox? Like, what? How? What?
Like, it doesn't predate. So literally, it doesn't predate. Like,
And
a
even if
paradox, it formulates when there is a a paradox. Paradox is not a real thing, but like a contradiction formulates when you do two things, when somebody does two things that contradict each other. So if somebody, I guess, has a completely insane way to deal with that contradiction and they came up with it before somebody did something contradictory, that means that the solution is valid. I don't understand this logic is so absurd. Like,
it's not
I
logic, and
wouldn't.
this is not even a paradox. Like, the paradox is for believers, right? Because their God says, or their
Yes.
God implies, or their religion implies, you need to be smart enough and you need to follow this method. But practically speaking, you can't follow this method, and everyone else from other religions also follow this method and arrive at different conclusions. That's the paradox. It's not
Yes.
a paradox for you and me. It's a paradox for him because he believes two things at the same time. That
Yes.
God could say no wrong, but also God said something that's impractical and impossible to follow. And it's kind of a black hole that every religious person can fall into, regardless of what their religion is. It's a trap. That is the paradox for them. By the way, let's take a small intercession because I noticed this comment and I would like to respond to it. So it's in Arabic. Question mark 7683 says, I see your seat in hell, Ala ad-Din. And it's poorly translated, so I wonder, because it says Ali ad-Din. I wonder if this is a troll or not. But I would invite this person, I would like to ask them, not inviting them to the stream, but I would like to ask them to write in a comment, English or Arabic. What makes you, first of all, obviously you can't actually see my seat in hell. You're not a prophet. I don't
Unless
believe
he's
any of this
there.
stuff. Unless he's
You know.
there. But what makes you feel that way? What makes you feel that feeling that you feel? What is it that you feel right now? And how do you feel after expressing this comment? I'm actually curious to hear from that person. Doxing isn't haram, is it? I'm genuinely curious because I'm not offended and I'm not hurt. I would like to know what that kind of person is feeling right now. Anyway, let's keep watching. What was Yasir saying? The paradox and the solution to the paradox, which is Quranic and Hadith.
The solution is inherent in our tradition, even though the intellectual paradox was verbalized by mankind fairly recently. Because the solution is inherent within it. And that solution, which one of the sisters brought up, is the existence of a precondition embedded in us equally as human beings that doesn't require external knowledge.
That is also a claim from the religion. You can't do that, bro. You can't do that. How did he graduate? Yale should call him right now and revoke their degree. Because what the hell are you talking about? We have a solution for this paradox that our God or our religion created, which is some bullshit that we claim that we're all born Muslim. That's essentially what he's saying.
The solution is a divine gift that solves the paradox. Without this divine gift, frankly, there is no solution to this paradox. If we didn't have this solution in the Quran and Sunnah, then honestly, we would be at an impasse. We would literally be stuck because there's a
This is
valid
key.
argument to be made that, well, then we're just Muslims because we're born Muslims, and they're Christians because they're born Christians, and they're Jews because they're born Jews. And every faith tradition will assume it's.
So if only these other traditions had also mentioned a silly clause saying, actually, everyone was born Hindu, by the way, then they wouldn't, then Muslims would have nothing to say. You see how stupid this sounds? Because Islam is the only religion among those that has this clause that says, by the way, you're born Muslim even if you don't know it. Like there's also this belief that we all consented to be sent down to earth because God asked us, do you acknowledge that I'm real? Do you acknowledge that, all this stuff is real? And we said yes. And God said, so you want to go to earth and get tested? And we said yes. And then he wiped our memory. Sure, bro, that happened. And all the angels clapped. But like if other religions were to say something similar and say everyone was born a Christian actually, and then they stray away depending on how they're raised, what would Yasir Qadhi's argument be? It's silly to think that this is actually a good argument just because it happened in Islam to make another claim about how everyone's born Muslim.
This is entirely circular.
Yeah.
It's is everybody born Muslim? Well, yes, because Islam says that everybody consented to blah blah blah, whatever you just said, right? I can't imagine anything more circular.
I would like to hear that brought up in philosophy 101 even. The students, 19-year-olds would tear him to shreds for
Yes.
saying something like that, let alone other professors. He
No,
would say,
because that is what's done. It is done. Like I've taken 3 philosophy classes. I've taken critical thinking, logical reasoning, and philosophy of religion. And logical reasoning does not do this, only does structure, formal argument structure. Both of those other classes, these arguments were brought up, like in philosophy of religion, this actual argument, and in the other one, just some politician saying something. And you're right, they get torn apart. They get torn apart by this is first year stuff. It's so ridiculous.
thank you, late night Kaiju, for the super chat. They say, why can gods not issue their own threats? Why do they have to rely on their followers to make it on their behalf? I would elevate that question and ask, why threaten at all? Why can't they just show up and instead of make threats, but prove any of this is real? But yeah, so yes, it is saying, good thing we have a clause that says everyone was born Muslim.
Faith to be correct. But there's one aspect that changes the entire game, and the only faith tradition that brings it. This is an important point. I need you to understand.
Notice that the way that he talks is very important in presenting what he's saying as true or as something that you need to learn or you need to accept this. So he's a very good presenter. And for some people, some people might find his presentation method obnoxious. But as a sheikh, especially as an educated sheikh, he comes off as very confident, very knowledgeable, and he's telling you facts that you need to know. But take away the presentation method, the facts themselves. That's the point of live streams like this, is to focus on the words, not how good or bad of a presenter he is. If he stutters, if he doesn't, I don't criticize him or praise him for either of those things. But just notice how the way that he presents things makes you think, this guy knows what he's talking about. But is what he's saying true?
And the only faith tradition that brings it, this is an important point, I need you to understand. You don't find this notion in Christianity. You don't find it in Judaism. You don't find it in Buddhism. You don't find it in Shintoism. You don't find it in Confucianism. The only tradition that has this interesting concept that predates the formulation of the paradox is the Quran. And that is the solution of the human fitrah, which is explicitly linked to the religion of Islam.
So that's a good point. TM says, so did he read every religion and every faith to say that only Islam has that concept? Of course not. He didn't. It's impractical, as he said earlier. But I think his answer to that would be, well, if it was one of the obscure religions or faiths that died away or don't have a huge following, then that can't be it, because God wouldn't send a religion that would die away like that. That's probably his logic here. But what Yasir is saying is, because Islam mentions and claims the concept of fitrah, which is that everyone is born by default a Muslim with a blank slate, which is Islam, therefore we could just ignore this paradox that he brought up. We can ignore the fact that it is kind of blinding to be born into a religion and then try to look at it critically and just accept it because, oh, the religion says I was born, not just born a Muslim because I was a Muslim. Everyone's born a Muslim, therefore that fixes everything. How does that
I
fix
guess
everything?
I want to point out one more thing. He, for whatever reason, just now in his last sentence, emphasized that this is only in Islam, like it's unique to Islam. It's amazing how many different religions claim that kind of thing. Like, Christianity is the only religion where God became flesh, and Hinduism is the only religion that blah blah blah. Like, why does that matter?
That's an excellent point. I keep reminding people often that one of the methods that a lot of these religious apologists use is highlight what is unique to the religion and make that a criteria for the truth somehow. But on its own, is that a criteria for the truth? Like, for example, I've heard in Christianity that there's a lot of cross-referencing in the Bible, like the biggest amount.
Right.
Great. Does that mean jack shit? No, it doesn't. Like, does that, in a vacuum, does that prove that the Bible is therefore inspired by God? No, it doesn't. But they choose to focus on a feature or a thought or an idea or whatever that is unique to them, so that they can say, no other religion has this, therefore we have the truth. But yeah, whether it's true or not that no other religion has thought to say, actually everyone was born, insert religion here, doesn't actually mean that therefore Islam is true. It just means you have this concept that in one of the large surviving religions is unique. Is that concept provable, verifiable, falsifiable? Absolutely not. And he doesn't even pretend to attempt to take that apart. I don't know, maybe he does that later in the video, but so far he just accepted it as fact and he said the solution to all of our problems is another claim.
So
Okay.
I just want to kind of one more point here. If I were to say that I'm the only one with a blue house that is unique to my house, so everybody should paint their house blue. I don't get the logic here. Like, how does something being unique to me or to one thing makes therefore what? Because if you apply that to other things, like it's just smuggled in religious conversations. But if you apply it to anything else, it is laughably absurd.
I'll give you an example. Say and I love the examples of investments. Say I'm an investment banker, right? And I say my portfolio or my investment choices or method is unique because I am the only person who does his investments on the toilet seat.
Right.
Forget how well they perform or how poorly they perform. I'm the only one who does it that way. What does that mean? Like, does that mean that therefore I am the best, or that therefore I am a good investment banker, or my methodology is good? No, it doesn't mean anything. But in this case, it's trickier because the claim is that everyone was born in this religion already. So you see that's what makes it tricky. It's not just that Islam has the biggest book, or the most memorized book, which is another claim they make, but because the claim is that everyone was born a Muslim, but he doesn't pretend to even engage with that claim as a claim. He says it as a truth. But I'm curious, like, does he delve into that? Does he explain how, that is true, or how we can argue with that?
Q&A at the end, inshallah. Finishing, inshallah, okay? So the human fitrah explicitly affirms the existence of a divinely gifted, innately placed faculty. It is divinely gifted, equally to all human beings, not just to Muslims. Not just to Muslims. It's not just Muslims that have it, because otherwise it would not be fair.
Everyone is born a Muslim, not just the Muslims. Did you hear that? Everyone is born a Muslim. I guess he means to say not just the people who are practicing Islam, but everyone is born a Muslim.
No,
And
I
that's
mean,
what
I
makes
think
it
he's
fair.
saying, I think he's saying that not only the Muslims who are born to Muslim parents, but everybody.
Yeah,
So even if you're born
yeah.
a Christian, yeah,
It's just a funny sentence. Everyone was
it's
born a Muslim, not just the Muslims.
not just the Muslims. Yeah.
But he means to say not just the people who are currently Muslim.
Every human has it, regardless of faith. And because every human has it, every human is equally capable of accessing it. And that is the notion of the divine predisposition that is innate in the soul of every single human being. That
He says it's a notion. I would more accurately say it's a claim, right? It's a notion, claim, whatever. It's not a fact. And he hasn't began to demonstrate like any sort of, forget studies, any sort of anecdotes even about how people are born Muslim, even if they have no Islamic education. Like they're just born innately Muslim.
is called the fitra. What is the fitra? Well, firstly, and we're going to spend a few weeks on it, so we're going to come back to this point for.
He always says this, by the way. In every lecture, he'd be like, well, we talked about it before, or like, we're going to talk about it in the future. We're going to spend a lot of time on it. It's not an excuse, to have bad arguments when he does mention it in this lecture. I just want to make that clear. Because I know some people would say, well, you didn't watch his whole hour lecture on fitra specifically. I don't need to. I just need to hear him talk about it here.
Quite a while, and because this is really, without a doubt, this is the most obvious answer. How do we know Islam to be true? Before we go anywhere else, the fitrah. That is the number one response, the fitrah.
What does fitra
So we need to
mean?
discuss it. There are other responses as
I'm
Fitrah
not from
means-
Arabic background, so
It's an Islamic word. I don't know if it's used outside of Islam really, but it essentially means like your innate state or your innate like default sort of
like innate knowledge, like inherited knowledge, I guess.
yeah, like I guess our fitrah collectively as humans, or at least most humans, our fitrah is that we are social creatures. For example,
Oh, okay. So
our-
you would
our
say it's an
fitrah is that-
aspect of human nature then.
yeah, in a sense, like it's something that's innate to us. Like cats by fitrah. Not that people speak that way about cats, but cats by fitrah know to cover their poop, for example.
Right.
Like it's sort of something that we're born with. And he says by fitrah we are Muslim. Like if you raise a kid not Muslim for 10 years, he's not gonna or she's not gonna start reciting Quran. That's not the claim. But somehow in our souls we are born Muslim. It's a meaningless, unfalsifiable bullshit claim because what does that even mean? How do you quantify that? How do you measure that? How do you prove it one way or the other? I could say we are all born Hindu, but like I guess if Hinduism didn't mention that, he thinks that's good enough of a point that Islam mentioned it first, or Islam or the founders of Islam thought to make that claim.
we said, the Quran, the Seerah, the miracle of Islam, all of this we're going to come to, right? And they're there. But the number one response, how do you know Islam to be true? Well, the fitrah knows it to be true.
The number one response, he says. So again, I've covered a lot of his stuff about the Quran, the Seerah, all that kind of stuff. And he, again, with apologists, Islamic apologists, they never say Islam is true because here's this one thing. They'll give you 15 bullshit things, and they say, if you don't like this, go to the other one. But he says the number one response, how do you know Islam is true? The number one response is because everyone's born with it. Try that with a religious person of any other religion or a non-Muslim, religiously affiliated or not. See how convincing that is to them. See how much that makes sense. That's a response between Muslims to tell each other. That's not really an actual response to anything. Why are you Muslim? Because my parents were born Muslim. That's the real answer. But he says the real answer for him is because God made us all Muslim when we were born.
But okay, this is a little bit off topic, but like, doesn't that make God woefully ineffective?
In what sense?
Well, because the argument is that everybody's Muslim, right? The argument is that God made everybody innately with this quality of Muslimness, whatever the heck that is, right? Now, if fitra is analogous to human nature, right? You can see human nature playing out, like laughter. universal. You can find laughter in every corner of the world, regardless of whether they've been introduced to the Quran, right? You can find love, compassion, greed, hatred, all sorts of things. These are all different aspects of human nature, right?
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
If it is true, if Muslimness was innate to every human that is born, then shouldn't you have Muslims in the Aborigine in the Papua New Guinea who had never interacted with Muslims? Shouldn't you have Muslims in the Inuit population? Shouldn't you have like?
Yeah. Like,
And it just seems like the fact that you are born to your parents, like your culture, like I don't know what to call it, but like the exposure you have seems to be thousands of times more effective than God's fitra.
well, that's part of what they say is that everyone's born Muslim by fitrah, but then people's conditioning and teachings, of those around them is what molds them into something else or into Muslims. But
Yeah,
essentially, that's like saying, 3 plus x equals 3, x equals 0.
yeah.
X is nothing. Like if you replace Islam with, again, just an example, Hinduism, everyone is born a Hindu, and then molding them changes them into something else. It still applies exactly the same. Because yeah, a Muslim can be born a Hindu, but if their parents are not Hindu, then they're going to be, socialized into a Muslim.
It's
It makes
interesting
no
you.
difference. It means nothing.
Well, no, I disagree. It's interesting you use the example of Hinduism, because the thing is, this is so weird. Um, Islam claims to have an omnipotent God.
Yeah.
Why is this fitra or whatever it is that God created, like that's what I'm trying to say, is that this undermines God,
I
right? In
think it's the
Hinduism, it
conditioning
doesn't
part.
undermine anything, even if this was true in Hinduism. Like it would say that, well, karma works. I I'm not saying Hindus say this, okay? I don't know anything about Hinduism. But for example, they might say something like, well, karma works whether you believe it or not. It works regardless, right? That they would say something like that. With this, it's like, okay, you're born with this fitra, and you have to like praise the God. But there are millions, literally millions of people. Like God just utterly failed, you know?
If the conditioning is the part, if the education conditioning, the part that comes after being born, if that is what determines someone's religion or likely religious affiliation, then and
Right,
that is not determined by the person, by the baby that was just born, but by
right,
factors outside of their control,
right.
what is this test even about?
Yes.
Right? Like that's a point that they seem to be missing. There's a lot of deterministic qualities in this whole paradigm. And then at
Yeah.
the end of it, God would point a finger and say, you were not smart enough or wise enough or pure enough to leave that religion that you were conditioned to believe in, or whatever school of thought or non religion, and join Islam. But who made it that way? If fitra was so, like, if it was just that everyone was born a Muslim and it's something that you can touch, something that you could feel, something that you can point to, that withstands whatever attempts to try to, socialize or condition the person to something else, then maybe we're talking about something here. But if you replace everyone is born Muslim with everyone is born atheist, right? Let's
Yeah.
actually, because that one is actually literally true. Everyone is born without a concept of religion till you introduce it to them. If anything, that is a fact. That is actually a fact. Not that I care to argue it, but if you replace it with everyone is born a Christian till their parents change them to something else or their environment changes them, can Yasir Qadhi falsify that? No, he can't. He cannot. But he thinks that he wins because his religion is the only one supposedly that makes that claim. But it's such a bullshit claim, and it just means nothing.
Again, I
So
want to drive this. I want to drive this
mhm,
point home ever so slightly. Pardon me for using a crass example, but you used the example earlier of a cat covering up its poop.
mhm.
You didn't have to teach the cat to do that,
I
and
tried.
cats do that in India. They
I
do
tried.
that in
One of
in
my
in
cats
uh,
does,
in
the other one doesn't.
Indonesia.
One of my cats does, the other doesn't. I tried to teach him, it doesn't work. But
Okay.
I get your point. Yeah. it's not my job to teach them. They know that when they're born
Yeah, like
innately
when
by
like that to like that's a care. I believe that there's a stronger argument that cats covering up their poop is fitra, like in the sense that it seems to mean in Yasir Qadhi's argument, than the fact that we know that God, Allah is the true God, or whatever fitra is smuggling in, because it should be like that, like widespread. You didn't have to teach the cats, and it's regardless of where they are. Like
yeah.
they were in Argentina, in Lithuania, cats will cover up their poo.
If
But
they're
you
the
don't
same
find the same
species
results
of cat,
with
yeah.
people believing in Allah.
Yeah. And to your point, lately I've been reading a little bit into developmental psychology, like little children. And there are many aspects that if the scientists were to do a study on children who are young enough, toddlers, the results would be the same in the US, in
Right,
Saudi Arabia, in
right.
Indonesia, because it's not yet, they haven't been socialized. They don't have the ability to like gain a lot of influence. So that is something that is innate, and these things can be studied, and there's a lot of commonalities. So I also want to remind, like, that's not the case with Islam. If you do studies all over the world, you're not going to find Muslim babies everywhere.
Right.
There's no way to actually measure it. That's lucky Yasir Qadhi. But even if you could, you can't. There's no way to actually. There's no commonality in their Muslim beliefs. Um, but also, what was I going to say about that? The Yeah, so the commonality here. Sorry, give me a second. I'm losing my train of thought. Babies. We're talking about babies. I lost my train of thought. Something about babies and oh yeah, fitra. So fitra as a concept, if you were to call it instinct, if you were to call it innate, whatever, no one's disagreeing with that. There are things that we do innately, like we know how to poop, we know how to do a lot of things, how to drink, how to eat. A lot of things we're taught, but like many animals, there are things that are genetically encoded. No one's disagreeing with that as a concept. No one's saying we don't know anything, we don't have any abilities when we're born. But to insert into that a belief that babies are not physically capable of having a belief in God. I don't think babies have the cognitive abilities to form a thought as complex enough as what is the world and God created it and his name is Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. Babies are physically incapable. Like, why are we even having this silly discussion? A baby is physically incapable. This whole premise is coming from someone who believes in souls, not in biology, right? And believes that your soul that you're born with has the same capability as a fully functioning brain, which is not the case. Do you see my point here? Like, this is physically impossible. A baby, a just newborn baby, does not have the cognitive ability to hold a belief like that at all. So, what are we even talking about? Sometimes
Like
I feel
it
silly.
smuggles
Like,
in a whole bunch of assumptions, right? Like you have a soul that predates you, like that exists before you were born, right? Which is actually different than Christian beliefs. Christians believe that your soul is created at the whole abortion debate is around this, either at inception or at some point of time before, afterwards, or at the point of birth. But soul does not exist prior to your process of birth. So Islam believes that there is a soul. That soul is somehow like a coherent adult mind, right? That is capable of grasping these things. It enters into a contract that if a 7-year-old entered into a contract on Earth, on this planet, in our reality, it would be invalid, right? But this is like at the age of.
just to get ahead of the comments that would say, well, in Islam, if you die before you hit puberty, you're not accountable or something like that, for not being a Muslim. But that's
Oh, that
besides
just
the
that
point.
just that just that just feeds into my point. Like my point is that that somehow you're not accountable, as you said, before the age of puberty. Okay, in a contract, or in terms of, I don't know, like your soul salvation or whatever. But at the age of minus X, you enter into a contract, and that you're supposed to be um it's supposed to be held against you for things you as the human being, the mind has not been able to wrap your head around. Like, this is beyond disjointed and absurd. I'm sorry, I probably sound all flailing and disjointed as I'm trying to characterize this, but this is so disjointed.
I don't know why it took me so long to like think about how stupid this sounds. I mean, yeah, I've just been thinking about it the whole time philosophically, and like, how can you prove it? What's the argument? All that kind of stuff. But it's a stupid idea because the baby cannot physically think. Like, it doesn't have the complexity. It doesn't have all the wrinkles, all the like all the
Yeah.
brain parts yet. The brain doesn't even finish developing the prefrontal cortex, for example, till like the 20s. But a baby is born Muslim. How? That means nothing. But to answer like why that means something, because a Muslim believes that a baby is born with a soul that is in a sense the same person that the 20-year-old will be. The
Yeah.
same person. But that's not a fact. Who you are as a baby and who you are as a 20-year-old are worlds apart and could change based on so many factors, right? Where you're born and all that, and like how your life goes. So to say that you're born as a Muslim baby is meaningless, even if that was true, which is unfalsifiable and not true. It's bullshit. But even if it were, it means nothing.
Is this I wonder. Okay, so I just came up with this thought right now. I don't know how absurd it is, but is this does this fuel the attitude amongst, I guess, Middle Eastern? Also, by the way, my background, for all those of you who don't know, I'm from an Indian background, so I'm not Arabic. I'm not from that part of the world. But my culture, Indian culture, children are quite undermined, like quite just ignored, and just I just kind of wonder if this fuels that. Like, you as a child, you're just kind of this nonsensical vessel, and the real person that you are is like the adult that you will be, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, you're so, I don't know. Now that
There's
I'm saying it, it doesn't, it makes even less
not
sense.
quite.
Never mind.
There's a big theme in Islam of like obeying your elders, your
Yes.
parents, and never even voicing your displeasure. That plays into the conditioning of raising a kid as a Muslim. Yes, but not exactly in what we're talking about right
Not the
now.
way I'm saying. Yeah, sorry,
No.
that was dumb. Okay.
No, it's all good. Okay, let's continue listening to Yasir Qadhi. By the way, little side note, I've had several videos similar to this, like live streams where I'm dissecting someone's lecture, be taken down, or not taken down, sorry, demonetized in a sense, or the ad revenue would go to the person who made the claim because they're claiming that I'm making, that I'm using their stuff and breaking copyright. Obviously, I'm not just like sitting here playing the whole video and snickering. That's not what's happening. I'm not profiting off of playing their video. I'm actually adding a lot of value to it, whether you agree with what I'm saying or not. But this keeps happening, and I can't really argue against it or like dispute it without giving out my legal information. So yeah, I appreciate your support. If you see some videos are demonetized, that is probably why. Anyway, let's go back to watching Yasir Qadhi. So he says fitra is how we prove Islam.
That's the number one response. So then we need to then clarify and discuss. So we're going to begin the topic of fitrah today, and then obviously we will continue for a few weeks, inshallah, talking about the fitrah. So the first beginning point, what does the Quran and the Sunnah tell us about the fitrah? The Quran has a very explicit verse regarding the fitrah, and that is in Surah 30, verse 30. Surah 30, verse 30, Allah says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. Be steadfast in the deen of Allah, Hanif. Hanif means you are turning towards Allah, away from falsehood, away from idolatry, away from kufr. Remember, Hanif was the term given to the pre-Islamic Arabs who believed in one God, even though they were not Muslim. That was the...
I'm trying to follow his train of thought here. He says this verse says, stay on the straight path, using the same word that was used for monotheists. How the heck does that prove anything about fitrah?
It'll make
Hanif,
sense in a
they
second.
would call a person who believed in one God, but there was no Islam, there was no wahi, there was no iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq. They call these people hunafa, Hanif. So Allah says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. turn your face to Allah, to the religion, as a Hanif. Then, what does Allah say? فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That is the fitrah that Allah has فَطَرَ النَّاسِ. Allah has implanted mankind upon. So Allah links the Hanif concept to the fitrah. And what is Hanif? Hanif means to believe in one God. That's what Hanif is. To want to worship one God.
Let's pause for a second. What he's trying to say here, or I think kind of the translation of what he's saying, is monotheists existed even before Islam, which should give credibility to Islam somehow. And God says, again, that's a circular claim because we don't know God said shit if we're just assessing this. But God says, follow the straight path, or like stay away from, all the bad paths and the polytheism and stuff, like the monotheists before. And I've given you the fitrah to do so, or I've given all humans the fitrah. So is he like forgetting that polytheism has existed for way longer than even monotheism? They both existed for a long time. If there was a religion that said, stay away from monotheism and follow like the polytheists before you, would he think that's a good argument? Would he think that proves anything? No. So what is he even saying? He says, God said in the Quran that there's fitrah, therefore there's fitrah. Am I missing something, Theo?
I don't think so. I got a couple of things to say over here. First of all, so going back to how effective God is, monotheism is very new, like is extremely new. It's post biblical. Like it started right around Jesus's time, approximately. A couple of hundred years here or there. Prior to that, throughout history, there was no monotheism. There was always polytheism, and it is quite universal. And again, like if fitra is supposed to be this innate thing, fitra is like if Hanifa is part of fitra, if monotheism is part of this innate sense that we're supposed to have, that didn't work for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Like God has been completely ineffectual, according to Yasir Qadhi.
And like you said earlier, if it was an innate thing, you wouldn't see that polytheism popped up in many parts of the world,
Yes.
many different expressions that aren't connected to each other.
Correct.
If I were to construct a polytheistic religion similar to the theme of Islam that says, actually, this is all coming from the same set of polytheistic gods, it's just that all these stories were corrupted into these many religions, right? I can make that argument like Islam makes the argument for monotheism, that all the monotheistic religions, or the three, several of them, including some obscure ones that we don't know anymore, all came from God. I could say the same thing about polytheism and say everyone's born a polytheist. I would have a stronger case, but it would still be an unfalsifiable claim. Is everyone following here? Like, if anything, this is a bad argument to make even for polytheism, but it's stronger than for Islam. Because polytheism, in a sense, and I'm not advocating for believing in a polytheistic religion, but it makes a lot more sense instinctively for people to come up with a religion or a belief that is polytheistic. Because it explains so many things, or solves so many problems of monotheism, like the problems of evil, the problem of, uncertainty. If you have multiple gods in different domains and there's some battle between them, it's not one ultimately superior, powerful God. It explains the world that we view, that we see, way better than Islam. Does that mean that it's true? No, these are stories that people came up with to explain the world around them. But he presents it as if monotheism is the only obvious thing and has always existed, and its existence before and a reference to its existence in the Quran and Fitrah proves something. It doesn't.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of a trouble following your logic. So, like, if I'm just having a dumb moment, then you can, blow past me here.
So if I were to make his argument for polytheism, it would be a stronger argument.
Okay.
So if I were to...
Oh, so I 100% agree with that. I don't... So if it is true, right? If it is true that God exists and and he created this fitra, whatever fitra exists, whatever that is. So there's this innate quality that we have, every human being has, that of this recognition of this soul, monotheistic God, that should be popping up randomly all over the place, right? Just like cats covering up their poop pops up everywhere, and you can't trace that behavior down to one lineage. Islamic monotheism is linked to Christianity. Christian monotheism is linked to what is it called, Judaism, right? In the same way as let's say, for example, a modern sort of variation of rock music is linked to a previous variation of it, follows one lineage, right? If fitra was true, you should have many instantiations of monotheism that are unrelated and unconnected to each other. In fact, that is what happens with polytheism. So according to Yasir Qadhi's, or according to the argument of fitra, which may not be his argument, but like general, that it kind of, there's a much stronger argument for polytheism than for monotheism. Monotheism just doesn't fitra just doesn't support monotheism based on his own argument.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's not
sorry
to
if you were
say
trying
that-
to say the same thing and I had to spell it out my way.
No, it's good that you're phrasing it that way too. And just to reiterate to the people in the comments or people watching, that doesn't mean that we're claiming that what he's saying, if used on polytheism, proves that polytheism is true or real. No, but it would be a better. It would not be a definitive argument, I think, but it would make more sense, at least on surface level, than applying it to monotheism.
Yeah.
But either way, like it's an unfalsifiable claim that he's saying God said that we were all born monotheistic and into this one religion. I'm noticing that we're not making great progress in finishing this video. I don't know if we're going to get to the end of it today, but we'll do our best. If not, maybe we'll stream again to try to finish
And
it.
reject
We'll see.
all other falsehoods. So Allah explicitly says, the fitra that Allah fatara nasa alayha. Now we then, second point, what does linguistically the fitra mean? So we quoted the verse. It's clear in the Quran that Allah is saying there's something that an-nas, mankind, has been gifted. And Allah has fatara an-nas. Fatara means to cleave open and implant. That's what fatara means. And that's why Allah is called Fatir as-samawati wal-ard, the one who cleft open, the one who created the heavens and earth.
I
So
don't get this.
fatara means that you literally break asunder. And that's why your iftar comes from iftar. You break your fast, your futur. You broke it. So fatara, something was there, you cracked it open basically, right? That's what fatara means. So something has been put inside. And that is the concept of fitra.
So let me try to tell me if I'm misunderstanding. Chat, please participate. He's saying the linguistic origin of the word, or like the root word, is also similarly used this way and that way, meaning that it also means like opening up and inserting.
Is that what he's saying? Like Allah opened up our soul before we were born and inserted this idea, like implanted this idea?
He's mentioning, and listen to my words carefully. He's mentioning facts about the word fitra and
Right.
fatara and stuff, as if all of it leads to something. Like,
Right.
There's another mention of like how God fatara sama or something, like God opened up the sky or the earth. I can't remember which one. So he's saying the root word also like can be used differently to mean open. Therefore, it also proves that God opened you up and put the fitra inside you. What the fuck? Like, how does that prove anything?
I mean, if anything, this could be the etymological fallacy, which is yet another like somebody with a master's degree in philosophy, like more fallacies per minute than, my local politician.
It's insane. Like he can mention etymology and mention that it's interesting that it also means like, or in other contexts and other ways could mean opening up. So God is opening you up to the truth, and that is interesting, but it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't actually prove it. He says that's a linguistic proof. Do Muslim preachers understand what the word proof means? That's a linguistic factoid.
Yeah.
That's a fun fact. It's not a proof.
And language is descriptive anyway. Like like every word is supposed, it's there to describe what a phenomenon. It doesn't prove a phenomenon. Like definitions don't prove things.
He sounds like he's high and just being like, "Whoa, man, isn't it crazy? It also means open up, like Allah opened up Muhammad's chest and put like virtue and faith in his heart. Whoa."
So, I don't come from a Sunni Muslim background, but I remember being in these type of I'm a former Muslim, by the way, for any for people who are watching. I come from an Ismaili Shia background, and but which is very different than Sunni Islam, but it's the same type of rhetoric that is used. This kind of gives me flashbacks to, like, a conversation or sermon or whatever you call it, that starts off kind of intellectual, like with a veneer of intellectualism, right? Which always interested me. It always got me motivated. Oh, yes, finally, we're going to talk about religion from an intellectual standpoint. And I didn't have the vocabulary to, put it into those words, but I always was motivated by that. And I get into it. And then, it just goes into this. It just goes into like circularity, and it's so disappointing. And so, yeah, yesterday was like just flashbacks.
And so, just again to remind people, if you listen to something like this and you find yourself nodding along, especially if you understand Arabic, yes, Allah did mention, or Allah, the Quran did mention in this other verse, fatara, meaning open. Oh, yes, symbolically, visually, it is an appealing sort of metaphor that Allah would open you up to the truth. If you find yourself nodding along, pause and think, so freaking what? Like, what does any of this mean? If you were to use a pitch like this to sell a car, would that actually work? Be like, oh, look, the name of the car actually, if you look at the etymology of the name of the car, it also means to go fast. Isn't that amazing? Like, okay, sure, that's great. How do you
That's an
prove that
awesome
any of this?
example. Imagine a car being called reliable.
Yeah,
you
the
know.
Reliant Robin, I think, is a car. There's a car called the Reliant Robin. Not very reliable. Um, yeah. So I don't know. We could think of many examples. There's a comment that I want to highlight, by the way, because it was so funny. First of all, Killing Dogma, thank you for the super chat. He says, or they say, if I make my claim in another way, it proves it. That's essentially what Yasser is doing. W Stream Calahams, thank you. TM says, Yasir Qadhi studied philosophy to join the war on fallacies on the side of the fallacies. That's,
Yes.
yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep listening.
Sorry, just I
Mm.
want to add to that last comment. There is a phenomenon, or there is I don't know, movement or whatever you call it, in the evangelical Christian world, where a lot of people are getting degrees. Not a lot, like we're not talking about thousands, but many people get degrees simply so they can hold up their credential as they join the anti-intellectual side, right? So like there are people who are young earth creationists who get degree in evolutionary biology, and then they get on the side of young earth creationism, and say that so that people can have somebody with the credential, relevant credential. And this kind of feels that way, which is why it really annoys the bleep out of me.
Well, I can't make that claim on his behalf, on his
Yeah.
intentions to get that degree.
Well,
But
probably not, because it was a long time ago, but yeah.
but it's sad that it's ineffective, because there were stages in his career as a Muslim speaker and scholar where he seemed to display a degree of doubt or critical thinking or acknowledgement that the way things are presented is not what they're supposed to be. Like the phrase that a lot of anti-apologists like to use is what he said: the standard narrative has holes. So that's something that he said at some point, and because he got dunked on so hard, I think he kind of recoiled into his shell and found a way to make sense of things again, despite having a moment of lucidity, maybe, or learning so much. I don't know. I can't possibly psychoanalyze him, and I'm not going to try
No.
to. It's just fascinating that he has the knowledge, or has a degree that certifies that he at some point acquired the knowledge or did exams that should certify that he has that knowledge, and yet has not learned it.
because it is embedded in you. You can't get rid of it even if you wanted to. You have it within your psyche, within your existence. You wouldn't be here without a fitrah. And who has it? Fitrat Allah. Allah has gifted it. Allah has made it. And where is it? التي فطر الناس عليها. Every nas, every person has this fitrah, without exception. And the concept of the fitrah is further explained in a number of traditions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The most famous one is the Muttafaq Ali Bukhari and Muslim hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and I need you to write this down. I'll say the Arabic quickly and then I'll translate into English, but this is a key fundamental concept that, for me personally, the fact that the Quran and Sunnah mentions this concept is a miracle. The fact that there is a no.
Again, I ask the question, do apologists know, or can they define what proof is and what miracle is? Because how is this a miracle? What does miracle even mean? Miracle is essentially something that you don't have the knowledge to explain. To me, that's what miracle means, right? Or something that is so coincidental that you think it has some significance or intention, or there was a force behind it, when in most likelihood there wasn't. Some people might think, hey, I got an advertisement for 50% off something that I really wanted to buy, which actually happened to me. That is a miracle. No, that's algorithms. Or it's a coincidence.
But okay, hold on. I'm going to push back on this. I don't agree with you, which is to say that I think those are colloquial miracles, right? So what I mean is that, some people have a certain way of organizing their desk, and their roommate might say, "Oh, you're so OCD." Well, that's not a clinically diagnosed OCD. That is a colloquial expression of OCD, right? Somebody will just casually say that. I think that's what you're describing is like colloquial miracles. A miracle, and feel free to disagree with me here, is something that should be impossible. So Jesus coming back to life would be a miracle, because coming back to life is impossible once you're dead, right? A giant shard of ice, like several 100 feet tall, floating in air above the freeway, that's a miracle. Like, that should not happen. Now, it could be, I'm calling it a miracle because I don't understand it, right? I'll grant you that part of it. We will call something a miracle because we don't understand it, but we call something a miracle because we think it's impossible. Like, that's different than I was just thinking about Bob and Bob called me. That's a coincidence. And with 8 billion people in the world, coincidences should be happening constantly.
But they do, and that is the reason I mentioned that as a definition of miracle, because it, for a lot of superstitious and possibly religious as well, there's a huge overlap there. A lot of superstitious and religious people do consider some coincidences as miracles that prove their pre-existing beliefs, or another one they're about to adopt. So I'm curious, what sort of miracle is he referencing in this video? It's a miracle that, let's hear him again so we don't put words in his mouth. It's a miracle that these are mentioned in the Quran.
For me personally, the fact that the Quran and Sunnah mentions this concept is a miracle. The fact that there is a notion like this in our faith, to me, is a sign this faith is divine. Because no other faith even has this. Because this is...
So the miracle is, this is a unique claim in this one religion. Okay, so let's take it the other way around. Christians, correct me if I'm wrong, there are versions of Christianity that claim that everyone is born with sin or in sin or something of that sort. Islam does not claim that. That is unique to Christianity. Is that a miracle? Does that mean that Christianity is true? No. Something being unique to your religion doesn't make it a miracle or true.
A cheat mechanism that Allah gave us. And if Allah had not given it...
A cheat mechanism that Allah gave us. Hear this again.
As this, because this is a cheat mechanism.
Yeah.
Is he still talking about fitrah? Like, I'm confused.
Yeah, he's still talking about fitrah. Yeah.
Okay.
This faith is divine. Because no other faith even has this. Because this is a cheat mechanism that Allah gave us. And if Allah had not given it to us, we would all be in the paradox of how do we know any faith to be true?
But you're still in that paradox, my man. You haven't left it.
Thank you. He says this, by the way. I have it in my notes over here, right? Like he says this. Where did it go? At timestamp 17 minutes and 13 seconds. He says there is no solution to this paradox, except for fitra, and then the rest of this is all fitra. That's
Yeah.
the only. That's it. The answer to the question, "Are we all born Muslim?" is fitra.
So the answer to the title of the stream and the title of his video is yes, everyone is born Muslim. You would think he would delve into explaining how, why, how you can prove that, signs of that, anything. Instead, the answer is yes, and he uses yes, the fact, so-called fact that everyone's born Muslim to prove that Islam is true. So
But
his
he's gonna
video,
do.
yeah.
He's gonna do several. What are these called? Lectures or classes? Like this is not the only one he's doing on fitra.
But this is not even on Fitra. Like he misled me with the title of his video. I thought he was going to talk about more about is everyone born Muslim? He essentially said yes. That's it. That's all he said about that so
Yeah.
far, right? Am I wrong? He hasn't said anything except yes, everyone is born
No,
Muslim. And
no.
here's how it serves my belief.
He said it's more than that, because he didn't just assert yes. He is using very well formed circular arguments. Like look, it says in my religion that it's that, and look, it's my God says it's that, and it's just like it's a pylon of like a giant pile of circularity that is.
Well, let's see if he goes anywhere else. Otherwise, we'll have to wrap it up soon because he's not really going anywhere.
Well, there are two questions at the end in the Q&A section. Question 2 is also about fitra, but question 1 is interesting and it's something different. So if you are like, if you're bored of this, you should jump to question 1, which is it's
is
in the
a God.
chapters.
Sure. Okay. Let's go to question 1 because he's just saying fitra, fitra, fitra on and on. Let's hear him.
Beautiful camel. That is the purity of the fitrah. We're going to come back to what else the fitrah proves, inshallah ta'ala. But that is the summary of the fitrah. Okay.
I don't think I'm coming back to that, but let's keep listening.
So let's begin our Q&A, inshallah ta'ala. The first question let us do. Do you have any comments about the Pope's passing? What do we say? What is his fate in the akhirah? He was clearly a good person because he supported Palestine and oppressed people. When you also find Muslims who don't embody anything near that level of compassion for humanity, is it that any Muslim is automatically considered above the best non-Muslim? So this is a question that comes up every single time a non-Muslim.
Yeah, so sorry, I forgot to mention, it has nothing to do with the video so far. It's not relevant, but it might be interesting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I figured it's not about fitrah, but let's hear him out. It's a really good question. Not that I care specifically about the Pope or this one person, but the question itself is interesting. A good, so-called good person, I don't know what the skeletons in his closet are, but let's assume a person who did more good deeds in this world, and not just Islamically, but just, did more good in this world than a Muslim who didn't do that much good in this world. Are they going to hell just because they're not Muslim? That is the core of this question. I don't know if he's going to answer it about the Pope specifically or the general case, but let's hear him out.
Passes away, that is a person that is loved and respected amongst large groups of people. In my lifetime, there's been at least 2 dozen, 3 dozen people where every time it happens, there's a big controversy and people say, rest in peace. Other people say, this is kufr and zandaqa, this and that. Look, guys, it's really not that complicated, okay? Wallah, it's not that complicated. It's quite simple, actually. First and foremost, we firmly believe, as Allah says in the Quran, inna deena indallahi Islam. The deen, the religion that Allah accepts is Islam. We firmly believe, as Allah says in the Quran, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Whoever adopts another religion besides Islam, Allah will not accept it of him. So we firmly state, without any caveat, without any embarrassment, there is only one road that leads to Jannah, and that road is the road of submission to Allah, which is known as Islam.
By the way, I want to highlight here that it's not just that there's one road that leads to Jannah. It's that every other way leads to hell. And that I find way more important than heaven. So heaven and hell don't cancel out, right? putting us in this wager, if any of this is actually true, putting humanity through this wager where the majority is going to hell, some people going to heaven, or even half the people going to heaven, if that was the statistic, which I don't think is the case. If 50% of humanity were to go to heaven and 50 to go to hell, these don't cancel out. The possibility of you going to heaven does not outweigh the risk of going to hell because you died following the other wrong, unfalsifiable, unprovable religion, right? But he's saying there's only one path to heaven. Yeah, but also think about hell, not just heaven.
That is one road that leads to Jannah. Now, therefore, anybody who's on this road and follows the commandments of the road, because being on it doesn't mean you have a label that has big Muslim on it. No. If you are on the road, following the rules of the road, as a default, you shall enter Jannah, insha'Allah ta'ala. People that are not on that road, no other road leads to Islam, leads to Jannah. The road does not lead to Jannah. However, in Allah's mercy, there might be some people that are on the wrong road. The road does not lead to Jannah, but Allah might forgive those individuals on an exceptional case-by-case basis. So nobody should ever preach other roads lead to Jannah.
How do you
By the
feel
way,
about that?
before we answer him, if you're listening and you're not watching, now's your chance to turn on, the video and look at my very cute cat. He's right here. Yeah, chat goes crazy as soon as a cat passes by. Anyway, what do I think about that? They always rely on this cop out of, well, God's going to be forgiving some exceptions, right? We can't really say if the Pope specifically is going to heaven or hell because God is able to give an exception to everybody and God makes careful considerations in everyone's life. But it's bullshit. Because no one's asking, at least I'm not concerned with, is this specific guy going to heaven or hell? It's a case study. A person with these qualities, are they likely to go to heaven or hell? The answer is strictly they're going to hell. As he said unapologetically earlier, right? He just said, we say it unapologetically, without shame, without embarrassment. If you don't follow Islam, you're not going to heaven. But then there's a bit of apologetics saying, but sometimes God makes exceptions. So who knows? Maybe this Pope is going to heaven. But that's not enough. Is God going to give an exception to every person who's not a terrible person, who's not a Muslim? In that case, what's the point of even being a Muslim?
Keep going, because he breaks that down a bit.
Okay, let's hear him.
No, one road leads to Jannah, and that is the road of submission to Allah. Trinitarianism, paganism, rejection of God as roads do not lead to Jannah. And anybody who says so has contradicted the Quran. But there might be people on the wrong roads. The road does not lead to Jannah. But for whatever reason, maybe they didn't hear about Islam. I'm not talking about this person, I'm talking about generically. Maybe they didn't understand Islam. Maybe they didn't have the wahi of the Prophet presented to them. And for whatever reason, they didn't get to the message, but they did have some piety generic, some Hanifiyya, because you have to have Hanifiyya. There is no excuse to not have a version of...
So some flavor of monotheism. So replace the Pope with, I don't know, a polytheist or a non-religious person. Let's make it simpler. Even Christians, sometimes Muslims say that Christianity is polytheism, right?
Yeah, so wait, okay, you're going in a different direction. What I'm trying to say is that he's saying some form of Hanafiya, right? Of monotheism, but doesn't that definitionally include all Christians and Jews? Because and
Well,
many
it
others
depends on
like
whether you
Sikhs
consider
and
Christianity monotheism or not.
yeah, but I mean, the thing is, I think Yasir Qadhi does not think that Christianity is mono, but most Christians identify as monotheist,
Yeah. But
right? They
okay,
don't think of. Go ahead.
I've tackled a comment like this before from Kebab Mailer. Maybe it was meant to be Kebab Maker. Disbelief in the Creator is the biggest crime. That's why. And that's why you deserve to be tortured if you don't believe in the Creator. That's a whole topic which I've been through many times. Why create people with give them a bunch of different paths they can take, all equally reasonable. Some more reasonable than belief. Let's be clear about that. Belief is irrational. And then punish them for not having an irrational specific belief that's equally irrational to every other religion, or just as not provable as every other religion. That's like, why is it a crime? Why is he taking it personally? That's a whole other topic. But what Yasser is saying is, if they have some degree of monotheism, which is why this answer is still bullshit to me. Like, take out the Pope as an example. Put someone who's not a monotheist in whatsoever, right? Either kind of religious in a different way or not religious at all. It's not an excuse to say, well, if they're a little bit monotheistic, or if they're monotheistic but on the wrong path, then maybe God's going to give them a pass. That
Are you?
doesn't, yeah.
What does kind of monotheistic even mean? Like if you're bitheist, does that mean that you're kind of monotheist?
No, it has to be like just one God. But even if it was another different, like
Like a
someone is not
different God?
monotheistic at all, like why is it that monotheism is inherently more favorable? Like God would torture
Oh,
you, like God gets jealous and would torture you
yeah.
if you think there's more than one entity more powerful than yourself in a supernatural way. But if you think it's one, then you're more deserving of not being tortured eternally. Where's the logic in that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. Like that's stuff that I used to ponder so many years ago. But like, why is God so butthurt at the idea that um uh, you might believe, not even worship, not even obey, but just believe the existence of something other than just this one person? Like, wouldn't that be kind of like my wife being jealous of the fact that I think other women exist?
Yeah. But in this case, like it's so hard to even make an analogy because God or gods, there's no proof for any of them. So it's just as feasible for someone to believe in multiple gods or some vague notion of polytheism or a very specific notion of polytheism as they are to believe in monotheism. There's nothing
Yeah.
that inherently makes monotheism more virtuous, more logical, more self-evident, more anything than polytheism, even enough to justify to the degree of hatred that you would get from God and degree of punishment and degree of eternal hell. It makes no sense. So it's a cop out to say, well, the Pope is kind of a monotheist, right? So who knows? Maybe Allah's going to give him a pass. Fuck the Pope. No offense. Apply this to every other person on earth. This exception means nothing, right? The majority of humanity is going to hell. Let's face the facts if Islam were to be true. So he
Yeah.
says it unapologetically and then walks it back. And he's like, well, if they're a monotheist, then maybe, who knows? What if they're not a monotheist? So, and they always have this cop out where they say, well, just being a Muslim is not enough. Or like, just being a Muslim doesn't make you a good person. Sure, but yeah, just being a Muslim at all is a better fate in the afterlife than not being a Muslim, even if you are a good person who's not a Muslim. So the whole, then they'll get into semantics about what makes a good person and so on. Can you be good without believing in monotheism? Apparently, according to someone like that, no. Anyway, I want to hear what else he says about this.
Hanifiya, by the way, right? Because Hanifiya, i.e., submission to a generic God, you don't need to know the term Allah. There's some tribal villages that still haven't communicated with mankind, still around, by the way. In Brazil and other places, in the Indian, with Andaman Islands, there are still communities that have not communicated with us, and they're still on earth. They don't have a copy of the Quran. They're still human beings on earth. We expect from them the fitrah. And if they embody the fitrah, they have hope for salvation.
How freaking entitled and delusional is it, right? That he would say these uncontacted tribes, we expect them, God expects them to have a belief allegedly that they were born with of Islam or some kind of monotheistic belief. And if they're, pagan or polytheistic in any way, they deserve to be tortured. I don't know the specifics of all these uncontacted tribes, but my belief is that a lot of them would be polytheistic or animistic. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong. And I don't, I mean, I haven't studied this in too much detail, but as far as I know, not a single one is monotheistic.
So his expectation is not met, and
Correct.
God's expectation is not met.
Which is my issue. This is interesting because I didn't know up until today. Like this whole concept of fitra is new to me. And like this is really interesting, because hearing this from new ears, right? This is like more absurd than a lot of the other aspects of Islam that I've heard. This is really bizarrely absurd. Anyway.
And I want to remind people, like, I want to make a parallel with, for example, birds. There are birds that migrate every season, and many other animals that do the same, but birds especially, that have some kind of innate ability to know which direction to go and where to go and how to come back. And that would be classified as fitrah, right? Like the same word would be used to say God gave them that ability. Isn't that amazing? And especially years ago, before MRI, before, you know, being able to study and figure out the flight patterns and how, like, what mechanism is it, the Earth's magnetic like the magnetism of the poles that they're following somehow. Do they have some kind of biological mechanism to follow that? And we're discovering things about that. And you could still make the claim, oh, God created them with the ability to be able to follow that, and or they evolved to follow that or whatever, and say that that is fitrah, that is innate thing. So fitrah as a concept that a creature can have innate knowledge or innate abilities is not wrong. But to then slip in, and also you happen to have a belief that Islam is true before you've had the brain to believe in anything, that's the bullshit part. So don't fall into the argument of saying, well, no, there's no such thing as innate knowledge. There is. Somehow, genetically encoded, biologically encoded. Maybe even there is a God that gave that. But there is nothing similar to prove anything about a fitrah of a belief. Not at all. And again, to remind you, babies are incapable of the cognitive abilities necessary to have a belief. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a neurologist out there.
Not because they're on the wrong road, but because they're the exceptions to the rule. So then point number one, we speak without any embarrassment. The religion accepted to Allah is Islam. Whoever chooses another religion, generically we speak, will not attain salvation via that faith. But point number two, we do not speak about individuals by name. Neither a Muslim nor a kafir. Because we do not know actual judgment. Allah is the judge. We speak of generic verdicts, not specific individuals. So we say Islam is the only way acceptable to Allah. However, if brother Ahmed passes away, we do not say for certain Ahmed's going to go to Jannah. If Sister Fatima passes away, we do not say Fatima is a person of Jannah.
And I've never had any interest in asking if specific people are going to heaven or hell. But it's a cop-out to say, well, we can't say if any individual is going to heaven or hell, but what's the statistic? What's the overall tendency? And the majority of humanity is going to hell. Like that's like if you were to believe in the Islamic system, the majority of humanity is going to hell, no matter what the exceptions. If God makes exceptions for everybody who's a good person but not a Muslim, what's even the point of following Islam? But they don't say that. So it's simultaneously a tiny little exception, but also a scale balancing mechanism.
I don't think he means that Allah will send someone to heaven because they're a good person. He may not have said it, but he's going to come to it. Keep playing. That's not the criteria he's using.
If they're monotheistic enough, then God may make an exception. Right?
I just keep playing.
Unless Allah and His Messenger have told us, the Ashara Mubashara, Abu Bakr is in Jannah, Umar is in Jannah. Yes, we are in Jannah. Other than specifics, we don't mention anybody by name. We say we hope they're in Jannah. The same goes for the opposite as well. When Christopher passes away, as a Catholic, as a Protestant, we do not say Christopher is in the fire of hell. We do not know their fate. We do not know their inner workings. We do not know how much they knew, what not. But we may speak generically, and we may say anybody who knew Islam and rejected it, knowing the truth of Islam. There's no question about this. We should not mince our words here. Anybody who knew the risala of the Prophet ﷺ and understood it and knowingly rejected it. I mean, honestly, there's no question here. And
I've talked about this so many times. This denying, like this knowing denier, is what they believe a kafir is. but I don't think most people, if any, fit in that criteria.
I was going to ask you, what is the meaning of kafir? I keep forgetting. Is it just a
Someone who knows
non-believer?
the truth but covers it. That's the etymological origin, is covering up. So a kafir knows that Islam is true but chooses not to follow it anyway. But
So a
obviously,
conscious denier,
yes. But
a
like, do
conscious,
you think,
deliberate
are
denier.
you a kafir by that definition? Am I a kafir? And I've had people
Um,
tell me that as like I've had Muslims say that as sort of a saving grace, to say, well, if that's not you, then you're not a kafir. Then God might be kind to you. But then where are the kuffar? Where are those people who know Islam is true, aside from the stories, right? That this guy used to, hate the Prophet and he didn't join Islam out of spite. But like in reality, where are the people who know Islam is true but deny it anyway?
I don't think he's using it that way, though.
That is literally what he's saying.
No,
Hear
but
him
I
out.
don't think
Sallallahu alaihi
he's.
wasallam. And
I don't
Hear
think
him out. Hear
he's
him out.
using the term kafir in that way. I don't think
He
he's
is.
using it because he said whether you're Muslim or kafir, which I think his the way that he's using it, he's just
They use
as a
it both ways, though. That's the
okay.
infuriating part. They use
Okay.
it both ways. Hear his words. He literally says it.
Islam and reject. And we may say anybody who knew Islam and rejected it, knowing the truth of Islam, there's no question about this. We should not mince our words here. Anybody who knew the risala of the Prophet ﷺ and understood it and knowingly rejected it. I mean, honestly, there's no question here. And we should not be embarrassed to say this, right? And here's the point here.
He didn't actually say what he's not embarrassed to say. They go to hell because they're kuffar.
Yeah, I stand corrected. You're right. He does say that explicitly.
Yeah, that's and they use it interchangeably. Like they would say the majority of America, right, are kuffar. But according to this definition, they're not, right? Because the majority of Americans aren't people who so-called know Islam and rejected it. But even someone like me or you, like even someone who used to be a Muslim, that's not a kafir by their definition. I don't believe Islam is true. Maybe as a child I did, but ask me today, I don't believe Islam is true. That's not me knowing it is true and rejecting it. You see yeah.
So fun fact, this is yet another fallacy. It's called fallacy of equivocation. By the way, this is not my personal. I don't normally do this. I'm only doing it with Yasir Qadhi because he has a philosophy degree. I don't throw around fallacies constantly, but this is hilarious.
Yeah. This is one of the biggest fallacies, and I made a whole video about this in Islam. It is all built on this lie that people who don't believe know that it's the truth, but refuse to believe, and therefore they deserve to be punished, and so on and so forth. But simultaneously, they also use kafir to mean someone who's not a Muslim. Like, which one is it?
Yeah, generically.
The brother or the sister says that he was clearly a good man because he supported the Palestinians. And we say supporting the Palestinians is indeed a good. But far more important than that is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And
There you go.
there's no question that somebody who rejects Allah, I'm not saying about this person because we don't speak about specifics, right? One of the rules of a Muslim, we don't speak about specifics. So I will not pass a verdict on a person.
Okay, because these examples have been made before. If someone supports, Palestinians' right to exist and hates what is happening to them, but they don't believe in God or don't believe in one God, God's like, what the frick? How dare you? You deserve to be tortured forever. But then you have a person who's like, I don't really care about the victims of war, but I believe in one God. Well, maybe that person might get a pass. Where's the logic in that? A person can serve their life in servitude of others and bettering the world. But if they don't believe in God in the way that he wants, or if they don't believe in God at all, or if they believe in multiple gods, he gets so offended that he will torture them forever.
Yeah. I have a question you may not be able to answer, but I'm confused about this. Okay. So like I know Islam is about believing in Allah and believing in Momo as the messenger. And what I'm trying to wrap my head around is that what if somebody believed in one God, like unambiguously, right? Not Trinity, just one God. They think the idea of multiple gods is completely absurd, but they're not at all Muslim. They don't salat, they don't
Mm.
zakat, they
Yeah, yeah.
don't follow momo.
Ask the question.
Where
What
does this
about me?
person land?
So again, case by case, God knows, right? Is what they say. But that person has a better chance of getting a pass to heaven or getting a pass from hell than a person who believes in multiple or no God. They have a possibility of being considered,
Right.
even if they're not Muslim, because by virtue of being a monotheist, by virtue of acknowledging the so called clear and truth of there's only one God, there's no other chance that there could be more than one God, God prefers that enough that he'll give them a chance compared to someone who is a mushrik, who commits shirk, who acknowledges more than one God or another God aside from Allah.
Okay.
That's how petty this being is.
You need to tell me what mushrik and shirk
Mushrik is
mean.
someone who commits shirk, and shirk is associating others with God.
Oh, okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Equivocating other entities.
Yeah. So, if you were to even some people consider having some kind of intercession, like saints and so on, that to be shirk. Some
Oh, I
people would
see.
say, well, having, believing in other gods or multiple gods or other gods, including Allah. There were people who did that before Islam because Allah was one of the many gods believed in, or one, a name of one of the gods. Um, God hates that so much that yes, the person you're describing has a better chance of avoiding hell than someone who does not believe in one God.
Okay.
How petty is that being? And I've been rewatching Sopranos recently, which is a show about the Italian mafia in New Jersey or something. It's a fictional show, but a lot of the themes, I guess, are inspired by real characters or real events or the themes. And this reminds me of a mobster, where, say, Tony Soprano, he doesn't care if you kill um, a night worker. He doesn't care if you kill a passerby, as long as you don't get caught. He cares if you do something that harms him or his people. That's how I view Allah. Allah doesn't care if you harm, like if you help people, if you don't acknowledge him. How are you benefiting me, is what Allah says. How are you worshiping me? If you go your whole life doing charity, but you're not believing in one God or me specifically, you should be tortured. Isn't that like a mobster, like a mafia boss type psychological distress? Like it's sociopathic almost. It's narcissistic. It's insane. It's not
This is
benevolent. It's not worthy of praise. It's none of those things.
this is interesting. I never realized that. So this is actually pretty big. Sorry, this is really interesting. We may need to do a whole like a stream about that or something. So a lot of religious framework is based on sort of like a government framework, and I can do a whole thing on that. But in government frameworks, you're not allowed to do that. So for example, like we're talking about the oldie times, right? You have kings or monarchs who have laws. They maintain a system of law where a person within their in their kingdom can't just go around killing someone else. And if they do, then that person gets killed. Like that's where a lot of these laws, what we call Talianic justice, which is eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It comes
Islam
from
has that
that.
too, by the way.
Sorry.
Islam has some version of that where, like, if you kill someone, like, there's a way you can, like, pay it off or something like that. There's a version
Yeah,
of that
which
in
is
Islam.
yeah. Yes. Okay. So these go back really far. The oldest document that we have goes back about 3,800 years. It's called the Law Code of Hammurabi.
Mhm.
Okay, and actually, a lot of the Islamic code and the Jewish code is based on Hammurabi. That's beside the point. The point is that I find it interesting that those apply sort of in terms of maintaining order, but that doesn't apply to whether you get into heaven or hell, right? That ultimately, whether like if you murdered your neighbor, you may get executed. But then after you get executed, whether you go to heaven or hell is determined by whether you believed in Allah. Is that a correct understanding, or am I
To a large
straw
extent,
manning?
it's predicated on it, yes, but also on other factors. So like you, if you're a Muslim and you help people, you get good deeds for that, which either get you closer to, having a judgment where you don't even go to hell at all, or if you
Mm,
go to hell, then you go to hell for less amount of time, or you get more rewards in heaven, whatever. You get more points, good points. But
right.
if you're a non-Muslim and a non-monotheist, because he wants to make an exception for monotheists, but non-monotheist, right, who does the same good deeds, they don't count towards saving you from hell or anything. You're just by default, if you supposedly knew the truth and denied it, which is this impossible standard that they set for kufr that they themselves don't actually believe in or acknowledge, somehow, if you qualify for all that, no, then you helping the same amount of people in the same way doesn't get you anything in heaven or hell. You see what I mean?
Right.
It's like if you're a programmer, it's like a big if, right? If believe in Allah or monotheism, then go through a bunch of criteria, else hell, essentially. There might be another if for, well, then did they hear about the message, all that kind of stuff, but all that is kind of nonsense because at the end of the day, most humans are going to hell because they're not believers in the correct religion. And yes, that might be sloppy code. That is probably sloppy code, but I'm not a programmer. So good thing that I'm not a programmer. Um, yeah, that's one thing that really got me. Like, it's interesting how in the beginning of this lecture, I think we're not watching any more of this lecture, but I want to wrap it up. In the beginning, he talks about the concept of like how can we know that our religion, if true, is true if we're born in it, and everyone can say that about their religion. I'm like, yes, this guy's speaking facts. Where's he going with this? Because when I was younger, I had these thoughts, even as a Muslim, like, okay, well, obviously I would say that this religion is true, but if I were to speak to a Christian, they'd say the same thing. And then he dismissed all of that by saying that's just Rene Descartes, that's just unreasonable, or sorry, radical skepticism. The true method is this one clause that says we're all born Muslim. So we don't even need to think about all this stuff. And I am sorely disappointed. Um, Not that Yasir Qadhi can ever disappoint me more than he already has, but it is so insultingly stupid. And I hope, and I'm not saying that if you fell for this or if if someone who hears this and think he's speaking truth, that they're stupid. To me, as someone who knows that Yasir Qadhi is educated enough to know better than this, it sounds stupid. Um,
Yeah.
if you fell for this before, I don't fault you. We've all, at least I've been there. Um, it's just, it's disappointing. So yeah, Yasser didn't really answer the question to wrap up this whole stream, and I'll let Theo speak, of course. But to answer this question, Yasser claims that yes, God created us all Muslim, even though babies are incapable of thinking to that extent of complexity, and then our environments and our parents shape us into the beliefs that we have. But he
He
didn't explain how or why.
you didn't get to it, and it's probably not worth going on with the video. I agree with you, but he does actually mention that, he says almost explicitly, he says that, oh, I've known people who have people have tried to convince them all their lives, and they resisted joining Islam, and then just on their deathbed a couple of hours before the angel of death shows up, that they converted. And he kind of just sort of mentions flippantly on the side that we don't know if that happened with the Pope. Like, we don't know, but it sort of overarches that that's the criteria. It's like, it's not even God makes an exception because he sees what's in your heart. It's like you have to formally convert before your death, like on your deathbed. And
Mhm.
and the reason that we as Muslims, or not me, I mean, we're not, but the reason he's saying that we as Muslims can't say that about someone else is because we weren't there moments before they died, and so we don't know. That's literally the criteria that he boils it down to, which
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that because I've heard that so many times, not just from Yasir Qadhi, but this exception that they think is a whole like catch-all for like God being fair. Well, we don't know what will happen before they die, so they
yeah,
may convert before they die. Yeah,
it's not about God being fair. It's that we weren't in the room in the moments before they died. Like, we don't know if they converted converted to Islam, which is very different than God being fair and looking at the totality of this person's actions and their whole lives or whatever. This is not about fairness. This is just about God having visibility into moments that we did not have visibility in, and them literally jumping through certain very specific hoops, and this is just like very, very strongly sticking to that dogma as opposed to any type of intellectual enlightenment.
Yeah. It's trying to find the exceptions, the edge cases that somehow make it all better. But I try to always avoid these edge cases by saying, say we did actually know on his deathbed, he never converted to Islam, not even in his heart, right? We can't know what it's a person's heart, but like obviously the guy's dying and he's like, I'm gonna see Jesus soon or whatever it might be, or like some other religion completely, or on his deathbed said, boy, am I glad that I skipped all these Taraweeh prayers. You know, it wasn't, it was a huge waste of time when I was younger. I'm glad I spent my nights better. I'm going to die now. Please, don't miss me too much or whatever. And then they die. I want to know not just the exceptions, I want to know the general cases.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's always talking about these exceptions that what if he converts before he dies? You never know. It's so asinine. It's beyond,
Yeah.
it's insulting to my intelligence as the question asker and to their own intelligence as the answer.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like it's like saying, say you have an abusive parent who beats you, but like maybe they won't beat you today because you're not wearing the color that triggers them. Like that doesn't make it any better. We
Yeah.
have to deal with the problem, not with the trigger. So just because if they die and say the shahada before they die, God is not triggered and he doesn't punish them, doesn't make it any better. It's like dealing with the consequence and hoping that this person has a better fate than the rest of other general cases, not actually dealing with the problem itself. Anyway, Theo, I'll give it to you. Tell me if oh crap, sorry, I might have banned the wrong person accidentally. I'm gonna deal with that. But Theo,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your channel. Do you have any final thoughts here? Something that we didn't talk about yet?
Um, I actually I'm in a room which I have to surrender in about 3 minutes, so I don't have a lot of time. I have to actually run. I just wanted to just introduce myself a little bit. My name is Theo Critic. My channel name is Theo Critic. I know, very creative, and yeah, I'm about 50 years old. I'm same age as Yasir Qadhi. I know I look young. I mean, my avatar looks young, and I sound young, but I'm old. I'm not joking about my age, and I come from a Ismaili Muslim background. I grew up in the West. My background is Indian, but I kind of landed in the same place. And the reason I wanted to do these live streams with Aladdin is because there's a big difference between him and myself. I don't speak a word of Arabic, and I think it's interesting for us to kind of look at certain things from these two different perspectives and share our perspectives, and and discuss it in real time. So yeah, this was it was interesting to me. However, two things. Firstly, I have only a few videos on my channel, and they're actually, I'll be honest with you, they're pretty boring. So I wouldn't, I would ask you to check out my channel. You don't have to watch the videos. I'll update you guys when better
He's gonna
videos.
be making more videos.
I'll be making more videos very soon. I only have like 4 videos right now. But what's much more important than that is that you give Aladdin feedback about whether you like this live stream, whether you want me on here more, because, and I won't watch, I won't read the comments like unless you tag me specifically. So please be honest. It won't hurt my feelings. But like it's really important for Aladdin to know what whether you like this or not, and what kind of content, whether you want us to do more of these type of Yasir Qadhi videos or other people or whatever. That said, Aladdin, I actually have to jump off right now, so you can finish up.
That's all good. Thank you for being here. Check out his
Thank
channel.
you.
It's in the comments.
Thank you so much.
See you later. See you later, Theo. It's in the description as well. Anyway, I am so disappointed in myself. I accidentally banned the wrong person from the chat who didn't do anything. If that's you, I'm sorry. It should just be a timeout. you'll be back in the next live stream. There's another spammer in the chat. Anyway, yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Let us know which timestamps, which parts of the video or the live stream you enjoyed the most. And we did hit our donation goal this stream, which even if we didn't, I was planning on doing a live stream next week anyway, but thank you for getting us there. So next week, Wednesday, I'll have a call-in live stream. I'll post about it before. If you want to join, turn on notifications, keep an eye out. I'm not yet sure what exactly the call-in live stream will be about. I haven't made up my mind. Maybe I'll just have an open forum, have anyone who wants to talk, but we'll see what happens. If you have a specific topic that you'd like me to discuss, please let me know. Otherwise, let me turn on slow mode to get the spammer to stop. Otherwise, thank you everyone for being here. I really enjoyed doing this again. I'll be back. And thank you for the super chats, the donors, the patrons, the YouTube members, and the Discord members for being here. I could not do this without you. And as always, think critically, think for yourself, and consider watching one of these videos next.